Welcome to Bamfordrose, and it's forum chat time. In this week's forum chat, it's what forum chats are all about. Taking some absolutely ridiculous post on the internet about or concerning the Aston Martin world and roasting someone for it. And today's subject of forum chat is all about ECU remapping. So stay tuned, because we are going to actually run through the process of remapping an Aston ECU, so you can see what's going on, at the same time as ridiculing a particular moron that has set about commenting about ECU remapping in the aftermarket world, and always writing disparaging comments about the Aston Martin aftermarket ECU remapping world, which isn't quite fair. So stay tuned for this week's forum chat. So when an automaker releases a car, it's going to meet a particular emissions standard. Now that is going to mean a certain set of hardware on the engine. Easy one to think about is primary cats. That's going to reduce performance away from optimum, but the maker has to release the product at that standard. Now, done properly, and Ford in the States is a good example of this, the automaker will actually work with certain aftermarket upgrade companies, and when someone goes to spec a new car in the dealership, they can also spec a load of different upgrades if they go with a particular performance tuner that is, in that case, endorsed by the factory. What that means is, away from the factory, not directly sold by the factory, a customer has been able to get a performance modified car that may or may not pass the same legislation that the automaker had to pass to get the car into production in the first place. And then if we look at the wider BMW, Mercedes, Audi performance car genre, then there are tons of unapproved aftermarket specialists that are offering upgrade kits, ECU remaps, and significantly transform the performance of those cars beyond where the limitations of the automaker meant they had to release them. Limitations obviously because of emissions legislation. If we now bring this back to the Aston that we're concerned with, then like on the V12 Vantage, for instance, you can get rid of the primary catalyst, you can put some bespoke made manifolds on, you can put some high lift inlet cams to it, you can remap the ECU, and you can take the performance of that car from its 510 horsepower to about 580 horsepower. Now in the UK, we don't yet have really strict anti-tamper regulations. There's stuff like diesel particulate filters, and if an MOT tester sees that the particulate filter has been messed with, then that's a fail on the test. But for petrol cars, there isn't really anything too stringent other than having to pass the MOT emissions test. And in that example of the V12 Vantage, we've made the exhaust more free-flowing, and we've been able to take advantages of running less fuel, because the catalyst that was there originally demanded an enriched air-fuel ratio to keep it cool the higher the engine revs went, meaning that in aftermarket, if we've got rid of that catalyst, then we can remap the ECU to run leaner, deliver more power, and get fuel efficiency at the same time. We can do other things like make the throttle responsiveness more sharper. So if a driver wants a heel and toe setup, and how he prods the accelerator pedal, we can calibrate that. So there's lots of things that we can do to change the relationship of the fly-by-wire pedal and how the pedal operates the throttle butterfly. We can remap a few of the diagnostics so that you don't get any check error emissions lights on the dashboard. Now, what I've just said there is all understandable, it's logical, it's done professionally, it's delivered robustly. Yet there's one absolute moron who seems to go across every Facebook group and forum possible, writing disparaging comments about the ECU aftermarket remapping industry associated with remapping the Aston ECU. Now, in these particular examples, he's not attacking us directly. But as I can gather, somebody is trying to crack the code of a classic Vanquish so that they can remap that old timer to either behave in a different way or overcome some sort of failure that those cars keep on having. And this is yet another example where this complete moron rips into somebody in the world of aftermarket that's trying to achieve something that is worthwhile and would no doubt achieve a robust end solution for their customers. Now, as you can see here, someone else is trying to get to the bottom of whoever has been saying disparaging comments about remapping the Aston ECU. He says, "Can you send me a copy of what this guy, Matt Riddles, has sent you?" The guy, presumably doing the ECU remapping, who this Matt Riddle's character has attacked, says, "Yeah, sure. You should see the way he talks to me. It's like discussing and dealing with some 12-year-old internet troll." Now, I don't know, and I just have to guess. Maybe this guy, Matt Riddles, works for the factory. We don't know. Maybe he's in some sort of corporate role where he's underperforming. Don't know. It could be all of those or none of those, or it could just be simply because he could really do with providing us all his address so we can all mail him a pot of Vagisil. So the purpose of this week's forum chat is I'm going to take a Bosch ECU from a V12 Vantage S. We're going to connect to it. We're going to suck out the hex data from it, all the factory information that was put in by those very clever factory engineers that mapped it. We're then going to manipulate that data to give it more spark, less fuel, turn off the diagnostics. We're then going to create a calibration from that, and we're then going to flash it back to the ECU. And you can make your own mind up whether that is being done professionally, safely, by people who know what they're doing, or it's as Vagisil Riddles alleges, is being done without people that know what they're doing and screwing up people's cars. Right, so to start with, let's have a scan through of the equipment needed. So first thing you'll see here is KES 3 made by Alien Tech. So Alien Tech are pretty much the industry standard experts at making equipment that will suck data out of control units. So in the center there you've got the main brain and a few cables attached to it, attached to your laptop, attached to the ECU, and once you start the program running, obviously using a laptop, you can connect to your ECU. So here you can see now I've got my communication cable ready, got the ECU ready to connect to. There you can see all the pins ready to go on the ECU. So now we need to boot up the system so that we can connect to the ECU correctly. So here we are now zoomed in on the actual laptop, and we're going to boot up our program called Alien Tech. So when it loads into the screen, we're already configured to tune Aston Martins. That's all I ever do. So Aston Martin goes on my default page, and we're going to select the particular model year that we have. All the Bosch ECUs are the same, so it doesn't really matter what you select, but let's keep it correct. We're going to select a V12 Vantage S and click continue. Now you've got two options, boot and bench. We're going to select bench because we're going to connect directly to the ECU. Boot is if you couldn't do that and you needed to connect directly to the printed circuit board, but we can just connect to the pins. So we do this, scroll down, and that's going to tell us which pins we need to connect to. Lucky they have this zoom function because my eyesight could never cope with that. So we've got certain coloured wires that need to connect to certain places on the ECU. When we do that, this is what an ECU looks like when we're connected with all the wires and we're ready to suck all of that beautiful information out of the ECU. So after we're happy we're connected properly, we need to identify the ECU. So this is going to make sure that Alien Tech is actually talking as it thinks it should do to an Aston Martin Bosch ECU with the pins connected as they should be on the ECU. Just takes a little bit of a while there for it to identify the ECU. We're connected, it's retrieving info, and now it will confirm that it is the type of ECU. It will get the VIN number and a few other bits and pieces, and basically now that means that we're ready to read the data from the ECU. Again, goes through its secure connections. I mean, this system, Alien Tech, is so good that once they release their hardware, Alien Tech, as a product, then they have the next level of aftermarket engineering trying to rip them off. So there are certain companies that copy how Alien Tech works, so they can go and rebadge it, re-engineer it and sell it as their product. That's why this takes so long, because it's going through several online processes of ensuring that your IP address references with your logon, you're in the location in the world that you tell them you're going to be in, and that's why it takes quite a long time to connect to the ECU to read it. You know, it's quite ironic, isn't it, that the factory release a product which the whole aftermarket world goes to interrogate to improve, and then there's another industry that takes those sort of tier one aftermarket people, both the people that make the kit like Alien Tech and the people that do the remapping like us, and in these companies they go and try and rip off those aftermarket people because they couldn't actually do this themselves, because this is quite difficult, and we'll come on to that in a bit. This is the easy part, just reading the data from the ECU. Nearly finished there, and then finally we'll reach 100% and we can then log off the Alien Tech tool. That's it, Alien Tech's done its thing, and we've got all this juicy factory data that's apparently bound by legal protections. Okay, so it's taken the data. What it's going to do, because this is so secure and robust, what it's going to do is read the data and then store it on its own servers. So if you ever got a compromised ECU or file, you can get back in touch with Alien Tech to get the original file that you read from the card. So that's quite robust, isn't it? Straight away there you can see that the aftermarket world is identifying potential areas that could go wrong and offering solutions for them. That's the easy part over. We've used Alien Tech, an industry leading tool, to suck the information out the hex drive. Now what we need to do is somehow organize that data and manipulate it in a way that we need to work with the changes that we've made. So now you need to use a tool to do that. Now there's a tool, a software name called Winolz, and this is made by a German company called EVC. Now this is the industry standard in data manipulation. So now we've got our data from Alien Tech stored on a C drive. We can boot up Winolz. This is Winolz now opening. Always comes up with a handy tip of the day. Fortunately, I'm a top calibrator. I don't need any tips, thank you. We can just now skip all the messages and load our calibration file into the system. So we can drag our file across into the working area. Now this program is going to try and be really helpful to you, and as you load it in, it's going to let you know if on your database are any similar files where the software, hardware, everything on the addresses of certain data was exactly the same as the file that you are trying to create now. Because if it is, then it's going to help you and say, well, hey, this program that you did previously, this is the same. Do you just want to import the changes you made before into this new program? But I don't like to do that as I'm doing here now. I like to load everything manually and do each individual element that I'm going to change on the ECU manually, because then I know that no mistakes have been made and the ECU is mapped exactly as I know it should or needs to be. But what I do have is a directory of different files that I've modified in different ways, and I select one of those as my reference. So here I'm going to select this catalyst monitor and sports exhaust. This is just what I call my reference file. So here you can now see all of the different maps that I adjust. What we're doing now is we're telling the system that the file at the bottom, which is my reference, is what I'm going to carry across to our file that we want to remap that's at the top. So what we have to do now is go through the list of maps that I want to calibrate. So here we are going to choose spark angle, basic spark, ignition advance. You can see all the different ones there that I normally change, but just for this example, we're on lambda at the moment. Driver demand, this is throttle progression torque, but we're just going to click basic ignition advance. So now on the bottom yellow area there, that is the ignition map that is in my calibration I'm using as a reference. So what I want to do is align that with the point in the many thousands of lines of code in the file that I want to remap that's at the top. I want to find where that map is in the data that I've sucked out of the ECU. So what you do is, as you can see me doing there, I'm just going one line forward, one line back, and you can see that my calibration that I'm using as a reference is now perfectly aligned with a space in the map in the file that I want to calibrate, which obviously must be ignition. So what I'm doing now is selecting from the below the yellow area to export all that data, import it into the calibration I want to remap, and select yes. And now, hey presto, I've just taken my reference map from my map pack into my calibration I want to change. As you can see now on the top, it's identified where my cursor is now. It's identified that that is the ignition map, and it's carried across all my changes into the software, the calibration I want to change. So we can click into that map, and what you can do is you can check that all the breakpoints are perfectly. If you hadn't carried across the data perfect, you would get errors in breakpoints. It would go 1000, 2000, 7000, 3000, and again with the engine load across the top. And then you can check that all the spark advance angles in this map for whatever speed and load, as I'm scrolling across and showing now, is changed as I want it to change. In this case, I want to be adding a few degrees spark because we know that we can run a bit more advanced than the factory. We can take some fueling out, we can turn the cat monitor off. Now I'm going for lambda. So this is the fueling curve that I'm going to get the engine running, and exactly the same process as I did before. I find it in my reference calibration, I align it to the points in the map on the calibration I want to change, I set the system to identify that, and I carry across all the data from my reference to the calibration I want to change. It now identifies that portion of the software read as being the lambda map, and we can boot into it once again, and there you can see the lambda that I'm now remapping the engine to run. And these are absolute numbers, so you can check that you're running the exact lambda that you want. You can now go and do that for every single bit of change you want in your new calibration compared to what you have set as your reference. Last thing I need to do is turn off my diagnostics that monitor the catalyst. Obviously, if we've taken the catalyst away, the gas flow measured by the sensor pre-catalyst and post-catalyst is going to indicate there's no conversion going on, and it's going to ping the catalyst monitor error on the dashboard. Obviously, we don't want that. So now, just like we did before for spark and fuel, we're identifying in our reference map where the catalyst monitor is in the calibration that we want to change. So again, in the lower yellow, red areas, this is the changes that I need to make to the catalyst monitor. I've found those in the calibration I want to change. I then carry across my data as I'm doing now, selecting to carry across all the map data from my lower reference map to the upper window, which is the calibration I want to change. And as soon as I've done that, it's identified the maximum relative air charge for the catalyst diagnosis, and now we're going to carry across the minimum air charge. Click OK now, and there goes the minimum. So it's learned that in those two locations in the data that I pulled out of the ECU with Alien Tech, that those lines must be the catalyst monitor. With the spark, the fueling, everything we've done, we're finished now with our reference calibration, and all we're left with in WinOils now is our calibration that we're going to save and create a file to flash it back to the ECU. Again, we check everything. We check that the breakpoints are correct for the catalyst diagnostic. In this case, this is the maximum temperature at which the diagnostic will occur at, and we set that to 0. Click in on the minimum, and obviously that's such a high temperature you'll never see that the minimum and maximum have been inverted, and it will never run a catalyst diagnostic. So we're certain that we have now all the changes that we wanted to make in our file, and what we're going to do is go through the process now of saving this as a calibration. And you can call it what you like. I've just got a naming convention of a customer's name, the type of car, whether it was the ECU for cylinders 1 to 6, the master, or cylinders 7 to 12, the slave. Whoops, can't call it a slave anymore. Sorry, it's a surrogate. Master or surrogate. Oh, I think even master's no good. Primary and surrogate. Can't call it master and slave. So yeah, the ECUs on the Bosch, they're different, master to slave. So we've called this one the master, and it's modified because on my C drive I've got the original calibration, so I don't want to accidentally map in the original. So this is now saved to the C drive. It's exported in a format that Alien Tech will now use and download. So Alien Tech has done the job of sucking up the file. WinOils has done the job of manipulating the data. It's saved it as a file that Alien Tech can now flash back down to the ECU. So this is exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to write to the ECU. We left Alien Tech open in the background, so we don't need to boot it up anymore. We're going to go and select the master, the modified. No chance of any hiccup flashing in any calibration. Really, it's quite anal, but you need to structure your directories in such a way where you can't make a mistake. We need to compare it against the original, and now Alien Tech can go off and do its thing. Now what happens here is Alien Tech already on its servers stored my original file, because as I said earlier, I can get in touch with them if there's been some corruption and get the original file so the ECU isn't crashed. In reality, I never need to do that because I can just flash it back to standard with AMDS. But if a garage, an aftermarket tuner, didn't have MDS and they suffered a corrupt ECU, then they're really in trouble. Alien Tech is so belt and braces safe that you just get in touch with them and you can get the original file back, and then you could reinstate that file back to the ECU. And if there was any corruption, maybe the power was lost as you were remapping the ECU, or the Windows, your computer shut down, whatever it was, if there was ever a glitch caused by the ECU, there was ever a glitch and that interrupted the ECU and caused it to be corrupted, then you can always recover the situation. So now Alien Tech on its servers is certain that it's got my original. It's certain now that it's uploaded my modified. What it's doing now is assigning a final checksum and being able to flash that bit of software down to the ECU. It takes its time, but it is Italian. What else would you expect? Finally, the Manana approach has kicked into life. We're ready to flash the ECU. And all of our hard work in remapping the ECU is going to download itself via the miracle of Alien Tech Flash Tool. There we go. So there you can see a complete run through of how you remap a Bosch engine management system. Now, as I say, this particular poster on many forums keeps calling out the aftermarket world, keep making wild accusations how it's unreliable. You shouldn't be touching what you're touching. Factory files are sacred, you can't remap them. But whilst what you've seen me do there is very professional, very methodical, very precise, checks for errors at every step of the way. Not all ECU aftermarket remapping is done to that level. What you've seen me do there is suck the data out of an ECU, manipulate the data how I want it, flash it back in, and I've done that real time connected to the ECU. That's because the equipment that I have there is called a master account. I'm free to make any changes to the data that I suck out and flash it back to the ECU. Now, most places just have a slave account. That word master and slave keeps popping up. They cannot make changes to data, probably because they don't know how. They couldn't use Winnows in a way like that. So what they do is they either use Alien Tech to suck the data up, like it could be another program, but Alien Tech is the industry standard. So they use a program to suck the hex data out of the ECU, and they send that to someone else who manipulates the data for them. So all they are flashing back to the ECU is a file that they've got no idea really who's written it and how good they were at writing it. They just flash a file back down to the car. So any one of my customers will know they ask for me to make the car more responsive to heel and toe, or they do have a performance upgrade. And if there are any subtle changes that they need because of how they drive, I can sit in the passenger seat with them, data log how they're driving the car, realize how I need to change the calibration to deliver what they're after. I can make that change to the calibration as you've seen in Winnows there. I can flash that back down to the ECU, and that's all done whilst the customer is waiting. Now, garages that cannot do that because they've just got a slave account where they're flashing in the calibration that someone else has made, has got to take that data that they suck up from the ECU, send it to someone else, normally halfway across the world, probably a time difference, so they can't do it whilst you wait, and then flash that back down to the car. This is dodgy in my opinion, because as a customer, how do you know? How does the garage even know that's flashing that ECU for you that exactly the right parameters have been changed in the controlled way that I've just shown you, that I changed them? What normally goes wrong is that when the tool has sucked the data out of the ECU and you've got your 7,000 lines of binary and you don't know if a particular line or a string of lines is an axis to a map or is a figure for a map, where I highlighted a particular map and identified it in the calibration file that I needed to change and carry that data across, they get that wrong, and it's just one line of code out, which is extremely easy to do. And then you've got a breakpoint that could be wrong, you've got a piece of data like a spark angle that could be wrong. So it could be 20 degrees before top dead center at one speed and load point, and instead of moving, when it moves up the engine speed range, it changes by 5 degrees, it changes by 20 degrees because the data point is just a complete incorrect misalignment of data from somewhere else. Now I see this in the Aston world lots. So what happens is someone has made changes to a fuel calibration for the performance wide open throttle running of the engine, but because they've made some errors in how they've manipulated the rest of the software strategy, then it will tick over. Instead of being closed loop lambda 1 fuel control, it's ticking over rich, it's hunting around. I've driven cars where you give it a full throttle acceleration and you start from 1000 RPM, 1500, 225, and there's a huge cough and jerky drivability because they've made a mess of some transition of a spark curve that went across several different algorithms. Not quite, but I do nearly as much remapping here, correcting errors from somewhere previous that's had a go at remapping it, than I do for actually when I remap a car that we've performance upgraded. And this is because the person or garage that you were buying the remap from don't really know how it's been changed. They haven't done it themselves. I would always buy an ECU remap from the person that actually coded it. Anyway, that's just what I think of it all. What about you? Give us your comments in the section below about what you think about ECU remapping. Hey, if you are Matt Riddles out there and you are listening, then give me your comments. Seriously. You've called me out on a few places online for dodgy remaps. Considering the whole process that I've just shown there, tell me what's dodgy about it. I don't think you'll be able to. Click us a like, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to head over to Bamfordrose on Facebook, where instead of me just standing boringly in front of a camera talking rubbish, then I actually start a new series in the workshop where I walk around a car and talk more freestyle on an iPhone, not too much editing, about a particular job that we're doing. So head over to Bamfordrose Facebook and subscribe, like us over there too. We'll see you on next week's forum chat.